Hello, this is Dr. Jason Munsell. It is Thursday, February the 2nd, around 12:30 or so. I thought I would try to get through a little bit more of Chapter 11. Again, I'm probably going to have to put some old lectures up because I'm so behind. But in any case, remember that next week is spring break, so I'll probably be bugging you because that's what I do. We talked all about the first bit of Chapter 11 and patriarchy and feminism and what we oftentimes see as stereotypical portrayals of gender in our culture. But the big thesis, again, is very, very important to me in this particular chapter, and that is, basically, in a nutshell, we have these socially constructed stereotypes of gender, right? Women should do this, men should do this. Women are from Venus, men are from Mars, whatever the hell that guy says. But in a sense, we have these stereotypes, and they say that oftentimes technology, on our uses of technology, like information communication technology, sustains those stereotypes, even though we can also use it to liberate ourselves from those chains of stereotypical gender portrayals and thus oppression. So basically, we talked about the gender and tech stuff, and hopefully you took a look at some of the links that I have here. And then this is where I stopped. A lot of the stuff that the book talks about here in Chapter 11 when it comes to issues of CMC, ICT, and family is how this technology has impacted sort of the work-family or work-home relationship. So they talk about that whole sort of balancing home and work, and they say it is naive and unrealistic these days. Go figure. Here I am at home working. But, it's the public and private. Everything's sort of blurred together, right? So I am in the private, I suppose, but this is public. It's all so very, very confusing. And all this certainly does have impact on gender, they say. They talk about how, this false dichotomy of home and work and a gendered work-family binary in which men and women traverse the boundaries of public and private in different ways and with different values and privileges attached to their movement, referred to border crossing as the movement both spatially and psychologically between work and home. That didn't make much sense. But basically, we have this, we need to think dialectically, they say, about the tension between work and life and the complex nature of all that type of stuff. But it's gendered because within families, there are stereotypical sort of gendered roles. Oftentimes, women are supposed to be the caregivers, men the breadwinners, but a lot of women work, obviously. But oftentimes still expected to do certain things at home, all of which is stereotypical and problematic in lots of different ways. So some of the stuff from Medvid I thought was pretty interesting, and Graham, I said it's very important here. So basically, this guy, this person, this woman, whoever, found that women more often than men were steered towards careers that allow them to manage family responsibilities, just as I was saying. In particular, for employed mothers, the boundaries are blurred as work and family responsibilities spill over into both areas of our lives. Women engage in paid work and domestic labor simultaneously. Thus, scholars also refer to this phenomenon as work-family conflict, or the work-family spillover, or work-life balance. So again, there is this big paradox, because is the ICT and CMC good? Says that the results are mixed, and there's still a paradox. The literature is mixed as to whether the ICT impact is helpful, harmful, or both to employed parents and their families. For example, while online communication technologies may support increases in family communication and interaction, Some technologies may create more isolation. So it just sort of depends. There is this paradox that it might help and hinder family life and all that jazz. I say the last bit on the bottom here is really important from, well, I like the quote from Jackson and the other stuff. Jackson says this: a boundaryless world means that coming home doesn't signal the end of the workday anymore. No kidding. And then being on vacation is a time of pure relaxation, or being under one roof marks the beginning of unadulterated family time. It just doesn't happen that way. The physical and virtual worlds are always with us, singing a siren song of connection, distraction, and options. And then the very last thing that's really important is the result of sort of the scheduling and the blurring and all this type of stuff is that workers' family life and their health are both being negatively impacted. Hence, the blurring of boundaries has both positive and negative impacts on working parents. ICTs enable workers to extend the workday in place but not reduce the workload, a paradox that leads to a complex negotiations and tensions between contradictory discourses. Oh, and then they talk about issues of exploitation and empowerment. Yes, we can be empowered through ICTs, again, information communication technologies, but also exploited by the folks who, our bosses, because we're expected, oftentimes to do calls and emails and stuff like that. And when are you going to do some of that stuff? Sometimes you have to do it when you're not at work, at home. And then there are a lot of negative consequences, they say, from work, obviously. Chelsea notes that the previous studies found that ICT use may blur work-family boundaries with negative consequences for employees. Despite being located at home, individuals work longer hours, sleep fewer hours, and develop health problems, which result in more work-family conflict. Woo! And then because of mobility, because of these things, right, we have perpetual connection with each other, which again can be good or bad, depending on the situation. I think bottom of page 198, as I say, is very important when it comes to this idea of perpetual connection. While perpetual contact is positive for achieving efficiency of work, the positive for family access and positive for family access, for the busy parent, this constant access can be extremely stressful. If one is always connected and always accessible, the individual feels like he or she is unable to turn off that access. We are always on call. See? Check my email. What's going on here? Okay, cool. All right. So it's sort of gloomy stuff, right? It sounds like technology is, there's some empowering things, but at the end of the day, it's sort of not all that great in some ways. Okay. Then it moves on to talking about more of the ubiquitous computing, that is the invisible, it's all around us, and its impact on gender. It says that although Queensberry and Trouth, although men and women both report high levels of work-life imbalance, women often do most of the domestic work, and women and men exhibit different behaviors regarding work-life balance. Of course, men may choose to stay home with their children, which may impact work-life management. However, recent trends are inconsistent. So, in a sense, particularly for working mothers, more work to do in a lot of different ways. Okay, and then they start talking more specifically about this whole idea of telework, working from home, phoning it in, and how so many people are doing it, but these stats are a little bit old. And it does say that most U.S. telecommuters are typically upper middle class, 40-year-old male college graduates. And in a sense, it can give you job autonomy, but also create work-family conflict. It can, because again, we have that spillover, right? Work, now it's at home, blah, 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 blah. Talks about some sort of Canadian study. Research on working families in Canada offers a different understanding of the role of telework in managing family relations, blah, 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 blah. Found work obligations rather than work obligations rather than family obligations led Canadians to work an average of 6 hours a week from home without pay. These extra hours amount to almost a full day's work. They also found that presumably managers and professionals were more likely to be given the necessary technology to work from home than women. By virtue of their privileged status, found it easier to telework, so sometimes it's more difficult for women. So, must weigh the pros and cons. If you do want to do this, it might impact women and children in a negative way. That quote is pretty good, I think. Demands of us heightened reflexivity and greater attentiveness to those who depend on our attention. Technology demands of us heightened reflexivity and greater attentiveness to those who depend on our attention. Using technology to manage work and family can disadvantage women by reproducing traditionally gendered divisions of responsibility and disadvantage children by extending the boundaries of work into the home. However, used mindfully, technology can also extend men and women's ability to engage fully with work and family. So there are lots of pros and cons, costs and benefits, but it also says that all this might make it more difficult for women to advance because if they're home, they can't not so-called prove themselves within the workplace. And we have, of course, the whole glass ceiling, blah, 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 blah. So, again, basically all this stuff is good and bad, but particularly badder for women. Then it moves on to talking about family, work, and mobile homes. Mobile phones. I got a mobile phone in my mobile home. Mostly, they say people use the cell phones for relationships, and it can improve relationships because, if you talk to somebody, some of these conversations are affect oriented as emotionally orientated. You get psychological pleasure when you talk to people on the phone, I guess. Family members. Hi, Grandma, how you doing? It sounds like you're in the next room.